what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show you what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
What you just saw was groundbreaking director Alfred Hitchcock discussing the power of the montage to influence, even change a viewer's opinion. This is known as the Kuleshov Effect. Soviet filmmaker Lev Kuleshov showed the following clip to an audience. Then he showed them this clip. Finally, this. The audience fervently remarked how the expression on the man's face was different in all three sequences. One showed hunger, the next sadness, and finally lust, as though they were all shot independently. This was not the case. The only difference between the three shots is the image spliced in between the close-up. In all three examples, the close-up shot itself was the exact same piece of film. The man's expression did not change. Kuleshov used this experiment to demonstrate how the considered assemblance of completely unrelated pieces of images and film can significantly alter a viewer's emotional response. This simple yet powerful technique has been used in propaganda to wage wars, win wars, spread tyranny and keep it at bay. It has been used in humanity's greatest films to make audiences laugh, sob, and scared senseless. But there is one force in our modern world that holds the deftest hands, the slimiest skill, the most astute ability to rearrange information, to influence nations, change narratives, and breed mass contempt. The media. The ability of the press, TV news, and increasingly digital media to take the truth and warp it to align with their ideological agenda is unrivaled, fastidiously straddling the legal boundaries as they do so. How, you may ask? I'm sure you're all too aware of fake news. Well, I'm not talking about fake news. I mean to draw your attention to a far more underhanded means of deception utilised by what you may consider the genuine media. Like most people, you have probably long suspected that the big six media giants that control traditional news, or the new generation of digital media, haven't always reported stories to you in the most genuine and factual way. But it's likely that you've never quite been able to put your finger on how or why. This is because the techniques they use to subvert the truth are crucially subtle. They are required, even mandated by law in certain countries, to be subtle. So allow me to enlighten you with just a few of the many masterfully subtle subversions that big media uses to sabotage the status quo. The media loves statistics. Why? It's not because statistics offer absolute, empirically factual truths in a concise and easily digestible format. No, it's quite the opposite. The media loves statistics because they can easily be modified to support the narrative that they wish the current story to tell. In 2005, the state of Florida introduced a controversial Stand Your Ground law, permitting people to use lethal force against an attacker even if it would be possible to safely retreat from the situation without violence. Reuters published the following chart showing the number of gun deaths in Florida over time. Wow, you may remark. Gun deaths dropped drastically following the Stand Your Ground law of 2005. Wrong. Notice the y-axis has been inverted so that the 0 is at the top. Ergo, as the line graph flows down the chart, the number of gun deaths increases, not decreases. This is purposely opposed to the way in which we have been normalised to expect the progression of data to invariably appear on an XY axis chart. We naturally expect up to mean more, not less. We also expect 0 to be at the bottom left of the chart. So then, at first glance, it would appear that following the 2005 statute, Florida gun deaths dropped to almost 0. Now that would be impressive. Another trick is truncating the y-axis. The news loves to use this tactic with crime statistics to make them sound more rapturously apocalyptic. How many times have you read or heard news similar to this? Murder rates up 100% on last year. What they often fail to report are the actual numbers. What if there was only 1 murder last year? If this year there are 2 murders, then that is indeed an increase of 100% on last year. But to the dismay of professional fear-mongering frauds, our crime rates are usually extremely low to begin with, except in a few rare places in the world. So 2 murders in even a small city of, say, 200,000 people is not a statistic to give you cause to organise a sign-writing party with your belligerent blue-haired buddies. So when you're shown a chart such as this, you would be forgiven for thinking that the interest rate shot up drastically between 2008 and 2012. If this were true, then we would all be donating our organs to pay for our mortgages by now. Notice how the y-axis is severely truncated to exacerbate the most minute increments of data. Plot the same data on a chart where the baseline is set at 0, and what we can now observe is that the interest rate, in fact, stayed staunchly static. It's not always appropriate to start a y-axis at 0. Sometimes to demonstrate a huge shift in data within a far greater range, then the y-axis must be truncated. But always be aware when you suspect it has been done to mislead you. As it has in an even more devious way in this chart published by the Ministry of Health for New South Wales in 2013. What's going on here is more subtle than simply truncating an axis. 43,000 nurses are graphically represented by just 4 nurse graphics. Yet, 28 nurse graphics are then used to represent 46,000 nurses. A numerical increase of only 3,000 nurses, making the increase in nurses seem astronomically higher between 2010 and 2011, when in fact there was only a 7% increase. Another way that information is often misleadingly visualised is through false correlations. This graph humorously suggests that there is a positive correlation between ice cream sales and murders. But of course, correlation doesn't imply causation. Just because I usually take tea around the same time that the Pope holds his morning mass, it doesn't mean that I am in any way persuaded by the Supreme Pontiff's pious utterings to enjoy a delicious pot of steeped tea leaves. Nor does it imply that my tea consumption is some kind of religious ceremony. The deception that can be wreaked by slapping arbitrary false correlations on a visual chart has been turned into somewhat of a fledgling internet meme by some witty individuals, as can be seen in these frankly brilliant examples. A lower GDP increases penis size. Using Internet Explorer leads to murder, which to be fair seemed entirely accurate to anyone who has ever used Internet Explorer. And my favourite, that global warming has been caused by a decrease in the number of pirates. When the media isn't distracted with developing duplicitous graphics, then it is usually divulging duplicitous discourse. One method by which journalists fool the general public is by using very broad assumptions to slap incendiary labels on individuals whom they don't quite agree with. Take a look at this headline by the left-leaning British newspaper The Guardian. UKIP welcomes social media activists linked to alt-right into party. This is the story that three YouTube free speech defenders, Paul Joseph Watson, Mark Meechan, Count Dankula, and Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, have joined the United Kingdom Independence Party, UKIP, the party responsible for instigating the series of events that led to Brexit. Now, I can't speak on behalf of these individuals' political views because I don't know. I cannot say whether or not any of them personally identifies with the alt-right, any more than I can say whether or not Kim Jong-un believes in Pamper Days. Followers of these YouTubers would argue that they are simply defenders of free speech, and that they all seek to rationally object to the irrational ideologies of the extreme left that is so pervasive throughout contemporary culture. Claims that these individuals are linked to the alt-right are widely unsubstantiated, and even the most prominent rumours are pathetically flimsy. But that doesn't matter, because sure, they have impressive support online, but the majority of the general public, and especially Guardian readers, have never watched any of these three men's videos, nor is it very likely that they were aware of their existence before reading the subject article. So, by writing the headline that they are linked to alt-right, the damage has already been done. Most people will instantly conjure mental images of what we typically associate with the alt-right: pointy hood white supremacists, neo-Nazis, etc, etc. Claiming that UKIP has welcomed these supposed white supremacist hate-mongers with a red carpet seeks to dexterously defame UKIP. Notice also how the carefully chosen image to accompany this headline is a particularly smug-looking Mark Meechan, who, and I'm sorry Mark, is definitely the most typically alt-right looking of the three men in regards to appearance. Why does it matter if headlines are misleading? Because multiple studies concur that a headline's bias hugely affects the way that the rest of the article is read and interpreted by that person. Headlines provide us with the setup for the story we are about to read, and no matter if that story contains conflicting information, we still view that information through the lens of that bias that the headline has pre-constructed for us. Clinical studies have proven how a news headline is written positively or negatively affects our opinion of something or someone far more than the actual content does, the actual body of the article. The wording of the headline also dictates what we remember most about the article and how we will report it to our friends later on. That's assuming that people actually read the article. Researchers found that in 59% of occurrences online, people read only the headline of a news article and never actually click on it to read the full article. News outlets know this. That's why headlines are and always have been designed to be captivating but often deceptive. Slapping unsubstantiated labels on public figures to skew the views of that individual in the eyes of the impressionable general public, thus undermining that figure's authority, is one of the most widely used modus operandi mobilised by the media. In today's heavily divided political climate, alt-right is a particular favourite label because, with that one short compound word, so much hateful imagery can be instantaneously attached to any individual. Even the most moderate of social commentators, such as Canadian clinical psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson, have received this treatment. NBC News happily slapped the alt-right label on him in this damning piece. So apparently having a rational, fact-based approach towards cultural and social issues and inspiring people to take responsibility for their own lives is synonymous with being a Nazi. There are other examples available. Jordan Peterson also famously clashed with Channel 4 journalist Kathy Newman, and it perfectly illustrated another trick that journalists do all the time: use manipulative language to put words in the interviewee's mouth. In this fascinating interview that has been watched by over 14 million people, Peterson carefully and logically deconstructs many commonly believed fallacies about inequality in the workplace and general life choices between the two genders. To which Kathy Newman simply responds with, So you're saying? Then a general inflammatory statement that she knows the viewers will react negatively to if she can just convince them that this is what Peterson actually meant. Whereas his actual meaning was something entirely different from what Newman suggests, which is perfectly clear to anyone with 2 ears and a brain between them. Why does she repeatedly attempt to draw false conclusions from Peterson's rhetoric? Because she is intellectually outclassed. And she knows it. She has no rational counter-arguments to Peterson's statements. But she cannot do the valiant thing and admit that Peterson's arguments hold some ground, because both herself and the network she represents have a certain ideological agenda to push. So she instead attempts to put words in Peterson's mouth, seeking to besmirch his moral character. Other linguistic tricks are commonly used by journalists when interviewing an adversary. Now, I would love to show you some clips of the following techniques in use, but as I'm sure you can appreciate how increasingly rigorous copyright laws make it very difficult for me to do so. However, there are thousands of examples out there for you to seek out if you wish to do so, and I'm sure you've noticed them in use on a daily basis anyway. So, for instance, anchors and journalists will often fall back on binary injunctions such as yes or no. Just answer the question, yes or no. When the opponent gives a lengthy answer to a deeply nuanced question that cannot possibly be answered with a simple yes or no without coming across as a belligerent fool. When an opponent uses empirical evidence or commonly known axioms to support their argument, it is common for the interviewer to come back with the ignorant response, well, that's your opinion. This is commonly used when the interviewer knows that their opponent just made a substantial and valid point and they cannot intellectually retort it. So by instead chalking it up as just their opinion, it undermines the factual foundations of the entire argument that person just laid down. When introducing a guest, it is common for a news anchor, talk show host, or other journalists to preface the interview with something similar to, John Smith claims he is an avian expert, but his critics say he molests pigeons. Let's find out. Notice the critical syntax here, but his critics say. Which critics? It is very rare that the critics who supposedly said that are actually identified. A broad generalization such as this rarely attracts calls for substantiation. And it doesn't matter anyway. The damage has already been done. In the eyes of most people watching, listening or reading, Mr. Smith is now a pigeon molester. When in fact, these critics could consist of no more than the journalist who just made that statement, witnessing a homeless man shouting "bloody pigeon molester" at Mr. Smith as he innocently walks down the street. It would then be legally justified for such a conjecture to exist, even if it does not represent greater public opinion. Subtle phrasing such as, but their critics say, is necessary in a world with libel and slander laws, because the journalists themselves are not making the vilification. Some mysterious critic is. I'll let you into a little secret. Almost every time a journalist uses the phrasing, but his or her critics say, prepended to a string of particularly incendiary pejoratives. It is actually a means for the supposedly impartial journalist to out their personal views or that of their companies on the character in question without personally risking legal defamation. An example can be seen here on torontolife.com. When U of T professor Jordan Peterson pledged never to use gender-neutral pronouns, he sparked a vicious campus battle. The free speech advocates say he's combating the tyranny of political correctness. His critics say he's a privileged, transphobic bigot who must be stopped. It's also worth mentioning the statement that Jordan Peterson pledged to never use gender-neutral pronouns in that headline is just an outright lie. Also, if a journalist uses the word allegedly before a statement, then it's usually the exact same damn thing. It's just another way to say their critics say. Subtle linguistic tricks such as this, that cunningly transmute opinions into facts, are especially important, thus often utilised in British news. In the UK, impartiality laws exist under the Communications Act of 2003 that legally mandates news in any format to exercise due impartiality and due accuracy. In 2017, British regulator Ofcom ruled that Fox News' Hannity and Tucker Carlson Tonight shows had breached these laws. But since Fox News no longer broadcasts in the UK, they could not be fined. News is the mechanism by which public opinions are formed and ideologies are built upon. It is therefore imperative that when we see wild claims and incendiary headlines, that we choose to dig a little deeper, consult other sources and build one's own balanced opinion on the matter, instead of moronically blindly copying that of a single biased journalist. Especially in a world where we have misleading headlines, such as this. Girls' School still offering something special. Head. Thanks for watching.